The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. He can use military force pretty much whatever he wants for 60 days. And then at the end of that time, he either has to get congressional authorization or the operation, whatever it is, will have to cease. That's actually not true. But I bet you think it's true, because that's what nearly everybody has been saying for years when they talk about the use of force. Whether it was Clinton, Bush, Obama, President Trump in his first term, Biden, commonly every time there's some issue pops up, the commentariat on any channel, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Newsmax, they almost all say the same thing, that the president has authorization as commander-in-chief to use the military for 60 days before he has to come to Congress. That is flat out untrue. I don't know if it's an intentional lie that people have been using to just make it normalized, but it is graphically and authoritatively inaccurate. The president does not have the ability to use the armed forces however he sees fit for 60 days, or 1 day for that matter. More on that in a second. The law, though, and the U.S. Constitution from which that law was drafted, it was actually a clarification of Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, where the war-making powers exclusively reside in the legislative branch, in the Congress. And so this war power in 1973 was put into effect over President Nixon's veto, I'll add, because they were concerned, the Congress was that the White House, regardless of which party was in power, was getting out of control and was going beyond, with the war-making powers, beyond what the Constitution allowed and what Congress was comfortable with. And the whole reason that we have the Constitution saying that what it does is because the founding fathers did not want a situation to where you had a king who could literally take the country to war whether it wanted to or not. They wanted to move that separate, so they took that power out of the executive branch and they placed it in the legislative branch, so that you have a division of powers, and he's the commander-in-chief, but only after war has been authorized. And we'll get to what those conditions are in a minute. They're really good. It's supposed to be, by design, and should be hard to get into wars. Not easy, not convenient. There are so much littered on the landscape of the last several decades, to where we have made a mistake after mistake, where the executive branch has gotten us into one war or another, claimed support and authority it didn't have, never was held account for it. And so far, they have been embarrassments. It's been ineffective. It's been humiliating in some cases, but it hasn't cost us anything really big. And so because of that, people have not been willing to hold anyone to account for violations of that law and of the Constitution. There is a situation broiling now which could bring this back into focus. In fact, something already has happened, but it could get a lot worse. You need to know about it, because the laws are in place to protect us, to protect the people from overambitious leaders who may want to bite off more than they can chew, who may want to bite off something that you don't want to chew. That's what the law is meant to protect. Ultimately, whether it's the president of the United States, a member of the House, a member of the Senate, governors, mayors, you fill in the blank, any of those people are supposed to be in position of power to help the governed, the people that put them into positions of authority, that our will should be carried out by the elected officials. Not that we should have nothing to say about what these officials do once they get into power, because then you have a situation almost like the kings and queens of days past, to where the people had no power to do anything except be taxed. And that's not the way we want our country. Not back then, not today. But there is something on the horizon right now which could escalate beyond all these issues I've just mentioned over the last several decades, where it was relatively low level and stayed that way. This one could get big, and it could be a real problem. Just following the rule of law by itself is a worthy goal, and something that should be done for its own sake. Because every time you erode the rule of law, you make it easier for the next guy in line to come in and erode it further, until one day we don't have any protections. It's a big deal. Let's take a look at this situation here now. Yesterday on Fox News, Mark Levin was interviewing Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on the issue of Iran.
Iran is a grave threat to the United States. They're trying to build intercontinental ballistic missiles. They want to have nuclear warheads. President Trump has made clear in his first term, in his campaign, and now, as have you, as has the Secretary of State, as has the National Security Advisor, you're not getting a nuclear weapon by hook or by crook. It's best now that you have a chat with us.
Okay, best now that you have a chat with us, left unstated, or we're going to have something else, meaning a war. We're going to use military power to compel you or destroy you if you try to go down a path that we don't like. That's what he's saying right there. Now, before we get into it, how the Secretary of Defense responded to him, let's take a look at the actual issues that he's raising here. Now, there are a great many people who say, yes, Iran is this nefarious issue. They are this the biggest state support sponsor of terror in the Middle East. That's the common thing that they're being accused of. But a grave threat? I actually, if you may have seen some issues where I was in the news in the last 2 or 3 weeks, one of the things that I was accused of was that I had downplayed the Iranian threat and was actually said, it was ridiculed as saying, he says Iran is a middling power, that it's not something that poses an existential threat to the United States that we can't handle with our own military power. That is an accurate assessment of what I said. That is precisely what I argued then, what I'm saying now. Iran is not a threat to the United States, not a grave threat, not an existential threat. It is at most an annoyance and a nuisance. Nothing that we can't handle with our normal force posture, with our standard military arrayed around the world the way it is. If anything happens in there that genuinely does escalate beyond that, where our interest or our forces are actually put at risk or attacked, we can do that with near impunity, and there's almost nothing they can do about it. They're aware of that. That's the reason they haven't. And this is not just an opinion, folks. This is a demonstrable fact. So all these people who want to try to tell you, yes, they're this existential threat. Oh my God, we cannot let them, keep going on with impunity. We have to stop them because otherwise there's going to be a big risk to us. That's a lie. It's just a lie. It's trying to build up fear of them so that hopefully if not when, the U.S. moves to have military action against Iran, that it will seem justified in your eyes because, wow, this is a big threat. You should be skeptical about this because this is sounding suspiciously like what happened in the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003, weapons of mass destruction. They're coming after us, and if we don't stop them, they're going to gas everybody. All these kinds of things that were said by the then Secretary of Defense, by Colin Powell, all these people that went up there, and George Bush especially, all claiming that this existential threat from Saddam Hussein, that if we don't deal with it, our children are going to have to deal with it, etc. It was always a lie. The war proved it. When we actually went in there, proved that it was a lie. We validated it on the ground, and it was self-evident before. Just imagine in that situation. We had gone in, and I was part of that battle group in 1991 in Desert Storm. We had emasculated the armored force of Iraq and had just turned them into, we exposed that they were actually just a shell of what everyone thought they were. The fifth biggest army in the world was the statement at the time. And we crushed large portions of it. And then now it was it could barely patrol its own borders and control its own people. Then we had 10 full years of sanctions on top of them. I guess it was about 12 altogether. And so, of course, when you go in with all these powerful armored divisions that we had, and I think there was a number of other coalition of the willing people that were involved. Of course, it felt like a house of cards because they weren't a threat. And then, of course, we didn't find the weapons of mass destruction because they didn't exist. That was the situation back then. And now then here we are where we're being told again that they're posing this great existential threat. And, of course, in this case, they're saying that because they can't be allowed to have a nuclear bomb, we have to be ready to go in and blow them up. But they don't have a nuclear weapon. They don't have a nuclear weapons program. This has been going on for decades. All the way back to, I think 2003, if I'm not mistaken. Don't hold me to that, but I think it was around 2003. The U.S. intelligence said they were toying with the nuclear weapons program, but then based on internal decisions, shelved it. And since that time, the Mossad and the CIA have continually said they see no evidence that Iran has started a nuclear weapons program. They are expanding their capacity. They have expanded their ability to refine products to get to shorten the period of time for a breakout, and they could probably have an operational bomb within months should they decide to do that. But they haven't done it yet. Then why are we talking about going to war? First of all, just on the substance of it, why is there this big emphasis and a press and a full court move to talk about there's a time limit on them, that we have given a 2-month time limit for Iran to respond to something that Trump offered to have negotiated settlement? He wants to resolve this by peace, that he said. But within 2 months, look, folks, it's been 2 months in the Russia-Ukraine war just to get to the deal to where we're agreeing on a tiny little sliver of a ceasefire. Now, what possible chance are you going to have to negotiate a nuclear deal in the aftermath and the wreckage of the 2018 deal that we got out of, and the complete failure of the Biden administration to get anything done? Now, all of a sudden, we have 2 months before apparently there's going to be an ultimatum given that either you surrender or you're being attacked. That's the implication that's being sitting here. There's not one. If you want to push Iran into a position to where it thinks the only way that it can defend itself is by having a nuclear weapon, this is a damn good way to do it. All of the things that have happened since 1978 to this day, or especially since 2003, apparently they were considering it for a while, but from 2003 to this day, they have not made a decision and taken action to have a nuclear weapons program. But we keep pressing them over and over. The Israelis keep pressing them over and over. And now then we've seen, to further prove my thesis that they are not a decisive and an existential threat to the United States, they're a weaker power now than they have ever been. They had this whole red crescent that you may have heard a lot about, and this axis of resistance, which was Syria, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis, and Hezbollah, and Hamas. All of those have been shredded or destroyed or badly, badly damaged. And yet, you see, consider this. This is maybe even better than showing how all of their allies and their proxies have just been shredded. Further giving example, physical proof of their incapacity militarily to threaten anyone offensively. They can't even defend their proxies. And you think that the United States of America is supposed to be afraid of these guys? I mean, come on. That's embarrassing and humiliating to even suggest. It's insulting. But yet people say it with a straight face every day. But just imagine, let's take the United States and Israel. Let's go with those two. If either one of those countries had some other power, whether it's a terrorist group or another country, doesn't make any difference. If some other power had attacked and destroyed one of our embassies to assassinate one of our persons anywhere in the world, or an Israeli leader was assassinated and their embassy compound was blown up by a missile anywhere in the world, our heads would be on explode. Our hair would be on fire. We'd be looking to bomb somebody within 72 hours. Somebody would be paying right away. That's what we would do. Tell me I'm not true. Tell me that's not right. If any of our people that was done to, an embassy was blown up and our people assassinated, would we not be ready to go to war with somebody the next day or within 2 or 3 days? You know we would. And yet that did happen to Iran. But because they wanted to do something, but because they're powerless to do anything that would not further harm their own interest, they took almost no action. Very minor responses that they made to it. Then another symptom. Now let's say that President Trump's inauguration the other day, or last month, on the 20th of January. Let's say that one of his invited guests was later that day assassinated by a bomb in Washington, D.C. Or when Benjamin Netanyahu, when he was sworn into power in this current situation here, he had some guests. One of them was assassinated in Tel Aviv on the day of his inauguration by another power and killed and blown up in a building there. We would again be ready to go to war. That did happen to Iran. And again, they took minor action. And even in the responses that they made in a couple of times, one with a limited missile strike against Israel, where they signaled their intent ahead of the time. They fired it in ways that almost nobody was hit. They fired a lot of them on empty pieces of desert. They did the same thing the second time. Then they used 300 the next time, but all of them were fired in such a way that it made it easy for us to shoot them down, along with Israel. They had some ballistic missiles, which did hit a few points there, but I think either one person or nobody was killed in these because they were very careful. They did not want to escalate the situation. We would never have done that. We would have been out for blood. We would have been trying to make sure that there was a big response to that if anyone dared do those things to us. When Trump in I think January 2020 assassinated an Iranian general, Soleimani. Of course, if that happens just to say the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff gets assassinated, we're ready to go to war with somebody. We're not going to be passive about it. Their response was to shoot a bunch of missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq, but in such a way that didn't cause anybody to be killed in action. There were some guys who had traumatic brain injuries, but nobody was killed in that, and that was it. They stopped. Now, if a country had power like we do, somebody's going to pay through the nose. We're not going to go tit for tat. We're going to go something even bigger than it is. Iran did less. They had a general assassinated. They had an embassy blown up, and they had someone assassinated in their capital city. And their responses were almost no or very limited loss of life on the other side, and then that's it. So that proves to you, and the way they've responded to all these things and the way that all their proxies have been shred, they do not pose an existential threat to the United States. Point blank, they don't. So now that we've gotten that off the table here, now let's take a look at what we're thinking about doing. Here, after Mark Levin asked that question, is how Secretary of Defense Hegseth reacted.
We are at a moment under this administration where President Trump is giving them an offer. He is saying, now is your chance to come to the table and completely give up and dismantle your program. Let's talk. I'd prefer to talk rather than do anything else. At the same time, he is ensuring that at the Defense Department and across our military, we maintain all capabilities necessary to work with our partners to, if we have to, and we don't want to, but if we have to, prevent Iran from gaining nuclear capabilities. So he's clear. The position is clear. Iran understands their options. There's never been a more serious leader atop the United States of America. There's a very serious leader atop the state of Israel. There's a clear message that Iran cannot get a nuclear bomb, and we are prepared to enforce it.
Okay, there is no evidence Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon. Again, if you want to push them in a direction where they think that, let them think that either they have to completely surrender, because what they're asking for, what we've asked Iran to do in this letter that President Trump sent, according to what's been reported, is that they have to completely give up their program, and they have to give up their long-range missile program. So they have to dismantle their long-range missiles, and they have to completely dismantle the capacity to even have a nuclear power program. All those things have to be done. Centrifuges, everything. They have to completely surrender all those things willingly in exchange for not getting blown up. Now, who's going to do that? Because now then, the minute that they do that, if that sounds a little bit familiar to you, it should. Because in Libya, the Bush administration got the Libyan government to agree to dismantle its nuclear weapons program, which it did over a period of years. It was celebrated, yay, until a couple of years later, when Obama said, you got no weapons program, we don't like you, so we're going to support a joint allied air campaign to drive you from power, ended up helping some rebels overthrow him, and then he was murdered in the streets. Now, where is the incentive for Iran to follow that example? Just think about this. Here's what we're presenting. Iran can completely surrender and give away its only possibility towards someday getting a nuclear weapon, someday having that prospect, and having the long-range ability to not just have a potential nuclear weapon to fire, but their conventional weapon systems and their defensive capabilities so that they can strike enemies from a long distance. You're asking them to willingly give all that up. They get nothing in return except for a promise with no validity that they won't get attacked later. I mean, that's insane. That is absurd to suggest that Iran's going to do that. Why would they do that? You're literally saying, take your only means of self-defense, give it to me, and trust me. Well, we haven't earned a lot of trust with Iran specifically, going back to the 2018 when we got rid of the JCPOA nuclear deal. So there's no trust between them. So that then is putting us on a course to where either Iran will demilitarize itself for nothing in return, or they're just going to not do that and stick where they were, Or they're going to say, well, damn, the only thing we can do now is to go ahead and try to get this breakout and to try to get a nuclear weapon so that we can forestall an attack here. Don't put somebody in the position to where the only way they can secure their own national defense is to get a nuclear weapon. Just on the substance of this, it makes no sense what we're going down the path to, because it almost makes war inevitable. Like there's almost no option besides war. And let me just tell you, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in it on this episode, but if you thought the Iraq war was bad, that is nothing compared to this one here. You're not going to go out and decapitate the Iranian regime and think that the war is going to be over, or think that they're all of a sudden all these pro-Western people in Iran are going to rise up. Yeah, they killed Khomeini, and then we're going to be thankful to the West. No, they're not going to do that. We thought that was going to happen in Iraq in 2003. How'd that turn out? How did the Libya situation turn out? It's still chaos and a semi-civil war to this day with competing national governments. It's always works out bad here. And that's actually the least bad of it. Because if it stayed only conventional, look, if you take the constraints off and you tell the Iranian leadership you're all going to die, like what happened to the Hezbollah leader, that he was assassinated when he was led to believe that they were working on some kind of a negotiated deal, and then when they found out where he was meeting, ended up assassinating him along with all their top leaders. So you've already signaled to Iran that having a negotiation with us is almost a death sentence. To give away their only defense is a death sentence. So you see where we're putting them in a position to where the only thing they can do is to either have a nuclear weapon or to be prepared to use their conventional forces. And if you've attacked them, and in a big way, not in the small ways that Israel has done up to this point, but in a big way, then you remove any constraints they have, and now then their very substantial military force and their missile force can be targets all over the Middle East, to include our troops. That's one of the reasons why I've been so emphatic that our troops in Syria need to be withdrawn immediately. Should have been done in 2019, but today would be fine too. We need to get them out of there because they are nothing but a pointless point of strategic vulnerability for our country that could get us drawn into war, or just our troops pointlessly killed, because that's the only thing they can reach with impunity. And our troops that are there, their air defenses are probably not satisfactory to defend against a concerted missile attack by the Iranians, because they do have some really good stuff in there as well. Let's don't find out. Let's get our troops out, but let's don't be in a position to have a panicked and desperate Iranian regime feel like they have to use their missiles now, or they'll lose the opportunity to do so. No one's helped by that. Now, that's on the substance of this. That's on the foreign policy assessment and why this doesn't even make any sense. They are not a core threat to the United States, and it doesn't make any sense for us to attack them, because then you can get into a war. And how does it end? That's the other thing that no one's talking about. What's the end state here? You go in and compel them to get rid of their nuclear power plants, and you go to war with them, and they still don't comply. What are you going to do? If they don't surrender, what are you going to do? Now you're in an open-ended war. Everything is bad for America going down this path. But there's another problem with all this, and that is the legality of it. The 1973 War Powers Act, as I said at the opening of this show, does not give the president unilateral action to use the military force however he sees fit for 60 days. Instead, Gary, if you can bring that diagram, this is an actual image of the law itself. This is the 1973 War Powers Resolution. And in it says the constitutional powers of the president as commander-in-chief to introduce United States armed forces into hostilities or into situations where imminent involvement of hostilities is clearly indicated by the circumstances are exercised only pursuant to 1, a congressional declaration of war, 2, specific statutory authorization, i.e. something like the AUMF that we gave to Bush ahead of the 2003 war, where it specifically authorized him to go into Iraq. Or 3, a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. So none of those things have happened. Iran has not attacked us. Iran has not threatened to attack us, and it certainly hasn't attacked our armed forces so far. So we can't say, there's nothing in there that says, or unless you don't want them to have a nuclear weapon, in which case, sure, go ahead and use it. It doesn't say that. So if the administration thinks that that is a national emergency, that it is something that is an existential threat to us. Should Iran get that, should Iran get a nuclear weapon, then it has to follow the rule of law. It has to follow the U.S. Constitution. I don't care if you love Donald Trump with all your heart, soul, and mind. He still has to follow the same laws that you do. You have to follow the laws in this country, whether you want to or not. And if you don't, then you're held accountable. You'll be arrested. You'll go to jail. You'll be tried for a crime, etc. That's how the rule of law works. You must have adherence to the rule of law, or you're going to have chaos, or you're going to have a situation to where you have an individual who can suck the U.S. into a war against anyone else's wishes. If the current administration thinks that that's something that is important enough, then they have an obligation under law to take it to the Congress and either get a congressional declaration of war against Iran or get specific statutory authorization. Now, of course, I would lobby hard against that. They shouldn't do it. But if they want to, that's the way you do it legally. What you can't do, according to our law, is just say, I'm going to do it. I think that they're bad. So I'm going to make the case on television shows like this, and I'll give a speech, and I'll send out some Truth Social things and try to compel people to believe so that I get enough of them to believe it and enough of them to support me. That's not how it works. That's not the rule of law. Just getting someone to poll numbers to support you is not the standard. I don't care if you have 90% of the people believe in you. If you don't have congressional authorization or a congressional declaration of war, the president of the United States cannot unilaterally use armed force against another country like we just did in Yemen. We've already done it. Every president, it's become normalized. No one even thinks, I didn't even the Democrats didn't even complain about it. It's just like, oh yeah, it's another use of armed force. But you see, every time you do that, you weaken the bounds of law and you make it easier and easier and easier to use force. Now, so far, it hasn't had any catastrophic loss on us. In fact, this Yemen thing hasn't cost us anything except a lot of interceptor missiles. And I'll talk about that another day, that even this situation in Yemen is not wise from a policy perspective and a military perspective, but it's also a violation of the law. But it's so normalized now, no one even thinks about it. The reason why I bring those up is because this one, if this one turns into a war, it ain't going to be like the Yemeni situation. This is going to be something that could cost us dearly. It could cause the Iranians could use their big strategic card, shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and send the price of oil through the roof because it's a global commodity. You can't just once they close that thing off with mines, it is very, very difficult to get that back open again. It could be a long time, which in our weakened economy already, if all of a sudden the price of fuel goes through the roof, and we could try to get Saudi Arabia to increase their production, we could release some of the strategic petroleum reserves, et cetera. That will minimize some of it, but it's not going to stop the amount of uncertainty and the price of the global commodity of oil that would cause worldwide. So there would be some real hit to potentially our economics as well. But every time you do that and the rule of law gets further weakened, then you get a situation like this to where we could be in a war with Iran that could be way worse than the 2005 war. Because now then, what if they sink one of our warships? What if they use some of their speedboats, maybe torpedoes, any ship missiles, cruise missiles, and something gets through? We have state-of-the-art defenses, but they're not impervious. Nothing is perfect. What if they sink one of our warships? Now then we're in a huge issue. Trump can't back down then. Now then all we can do is escalate. And what if these missiles don't work and taking out the leadership? What if they continue to resist? What if they have bunkers and command bunkers that even our bunker busters can't knock out? Or what if we take out some of these people and yet they continue to resist? And then now even some of the Iranian people who are otherwise pro-Western now are saying you're trying to destroy our country, so we're going to have to go against you as well. And then now they just keep fighting. Where does it stop? What's the end state? What is your war resolution strategy? What is the benefit to the United States to go in to do this if they go in and they just say, all right, well, then we're fighting a war with you, and then they start hurting us in ways? That some of these ballistic missiles that they have, that they all of a sudden start hitting our troops in the Middle East or some of our allies elsewhere. I mean, what if if they're faced with the use it or lose it situation and they just start firing them all over the place? We don't have enough defenses for all that stuff. Where does it end? An invasion? Because if you don't invade, if you don't go in on the ground, How is the war ever going to end? You just want another open-ended war? This could be so bad. There are too many people under the illusion that if you just throw enough bombs at somebody, it'll beat them. Look, Russia is often mocked as saying, oh, you thought you were going to win and take Kiev in 3 days, and it didn't happen. Okay, they didn't actually say that they were going to take it in 3 days. Actually, that was our chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff that said he was afraid they could do it in 3 days. They never said that. They grossly miscalculated on what would happen if the Ukraine army fought. But whatever the situation is, it didn't happen in 3 days. It now turned into this big, long thing that's now in its 4th year. Do we want to risk something like that because of a strategic miscalculation? Now we're in a war we can't get out of, because once a war opens up, it takes on a life of its own very often. This is one of those times that not following the law could cost us dearly. And listen, this warning was given. This very situation here is something that one of our previous presidents warned about. Now, I'm going to put something up on the screen here. And if you just kind of close your eyes and don't look at what's on the screen, what I'm reading from, you may think that this sounds like something somebody's saying today, because it is directly relevant and was foreseen by George Washington in his farewell address. This is what he wrote in part here. He said, "The nation which indulges towards another an habitual hatred or an habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. It is a slave to its animosity or to its affection, either of which is sufficient to lead it astray from its duty and its own interest. Antipathy in one nation against another disposes each to more readily to offer insult and injury, to lay hold of slight causes or umbrage, and to be haughty and intractable when accidental or trifling occasions of dispute occur. Hence, frequent collisions, obstinate, envenomed, and bloody contests. The nation, prompted by ill will and resentment, sometimes impels to war the government, contrary to the best calculations of policy. The government sometimes participates in the national propensity and adopts through passion what reason would reject. At other times, it makes the animosity of the nations subservient to the projects of hostility instigated by pride, ambition, and other sinister and pernicious motives. The peace often, sometimes perhaps the liberty of nations, has been the victim." That is exactly what we're talking about here. We have this antipathy towards Iran, and we only see them through the lens of being an evil villain, and that we have to go get them. And that leads to even slight umbrages or some issues that they definitely have supported some terrorism in the region. A lot of these things have some element of truth, but that doesn't rise to the level to where by law we can go and destroy them and start a war with them. And so that leads you then, by having this unquenchable hatred for them, to say we're looking for any excuse we can to go to war with them against sound policy in ways that a rational analysis would say is not necessary. I'm providing you with that rational analysis here. We do not need to go to war with Iran to maintain our national security and our regional security. They pose no threat to us when they have been profoundly provoked. They have responded tepidly because they don't want to spawn an even bigger counteraction. That's what weak powers do. Ergo, we are not threatened by Iran to such a degree that we have to go to war with them. That's why we need to follow the law, so that when our emotions get involved and we violate what George Washington said, and we make someone our permanent enemy, and we look only through the lens of hatred, that leads us to take actions against our own interests. We had better sober up and figure out that there are better ways to get this done, that there are other ways that through genuine negotiations that we can say, all right, let's offer you a better way. Because the fact that from 2003 to today, Iran has not pursued a nuclear weapons program is proof by itself that they don't want one. Because if they wanted one, they could have done it at any time. Even the JCPOA that is regularly panned as being ineffective to this day still has some elements that are in effect. And that's why there are International Atomic Energy Agency people on the site that can monitor some of this stuff. So they can't even do some of this stuff in the dark, because even though they have some areas that are off, that are not monitored, a whole bunch are, and they have monitoring equipment that can pick stuff up even where they aren't. All that is because of the deal we had. Now, you want to get rid of that too. Then the the net is that we could offer them the possibility of actually pursuing that. And we don't want to, because a good negotiations can find some kind of a win-win. That's if we want to live in peace with Iran. And unfortunately, there are those who don't want to live in peace with Iran. There are those in the region. There are certainly those in the United States that don't want a peaceful resolution. They have been itching for war for decades, and they are just anxious right now to finally get this one, quote, over the finish line. Problem that they're going to have is that however enthusiastic they are, however eager they are at their perceived benefits to this country, if they get their way, we're going to find out just how bad it is for us and how costly it's going to be. And I can't predict the how bad it could end up being, because once war gets unleashed like that, there's so many different options that Iran may have in response. If they're pressed up against a wall like a terrified animal, they could lash out in ways that I can't even imagine right now, but I can imagine them being bad. Let's don't find out. Let's follow the rule of law. Let's follow sound advice, sane policies, and do things that make sense for our country, that's going to keep us safe, that's going to keep our interests safe, and it's going to give us perpetual ability to prosper as a nation. That is all still on the table and possible, as long as we follow the law and sound advice here. That's where we should go. In the event that conditions change, and if we ever are attacked, then the law permits a response. If the Congress ever declares war on Iran, even though that may be foolish, at least we're following the rule of law. And then everybody is aware and they understand that if this goes south, then everybody's on the hook for that and they'll know who to blame. But let's don't do it where we just stumble our way into a war and find out how much better it would have been to follow the rule of law and sane analysis. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. I appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.